In the quiet town of Meadowbrook, where everyone knew each other by name and the changing seasons marked the passing of time, Thomas entered the world on a crisp autumn morning. His arrival brought joy to his parents, Linda and Robert, but also came with news that would shape their journey as a family. Thomas was born with Down syndrome. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, listing potential challenges and limitations. They mentioned delayed development, possible health complications, and warned his parents not to set their expectations too high. Linda held her baby close, looking into his bright eyes that seemed to sparkle with something the medical charts couldn't measure. "He's perfect just the way he is," she whispered, a promise to both Thomas and herself. The early years passed in a blur of doctor appointments, early intervention sessions, and small victories celebrated with the enthusiasm usually reserved for grand achievements. Thomas took longer to walk and talk than other children, but his smile could light up the darkest room. There was something special about the way he experienced the world, a genuine delight in simple pleasures that many overlooked. When Thomas was about 4 years old, Linda noticed something curious. Whenever music played, whether from the old radio in their kitchen or during the Sunday service at church, Thomas would become completely still, his attention captured in a way nothing else could manage. His little body would sway gently to the rhythm and his fingers would tap along, sometimes perfectly matching the beat. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out her grandmother's old belongings, Linda uncovered a dusty upright piano that had been sitting untouched in the corner of their basement. On impulse, she cleaned it up and had it tuned, thinking it might become a nice decorative piece for their living room. The first time Thomas saw the piano, something magical happened. He approached it cautiously as if drawn by an invisible force. His small hand reached out, pressing a single key. The note rang clear through their home, and Thomas's face broke into a smile so bright it brought tears to Linda's eyes. "Again," he said simply, pressing another key and then another. From that day forward, the piano became Thomas's sanctuary. While other activities often frustrated him due to coordination difficulties, his fingers seemed to know exactly what to do on the keyboard. Linda noticed how his usual restlessness calmed when he sat at the piano, how his focus sharpened in ways his special education teachers had thought impossible. "We should get him lessons," Robert suggested one evening, after watching Thomas play the simple melodies he'd learned by ear from children's shows. Finding a suitable teacher proved more difficult than they'd anticipated. The first 2 piano instructors they contacted politely declined after learning about Thomas's condition. The third agreed to meet him but spoke to him in an exaggerated, childish manner that made Linda's heart sink. Then they found Ms. Chen. Unlike the others, Ms. Chen spoke directly to Thomas during their first meeting, her tone respectful and matter-of-fact. She asked him to play something, anything he wanted. Thomas hesitantly tapped out "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," a melody Linda had shown him. When he finished, Ms. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You have good instincts," she told him, "and your hands are made for playing. Would you like to learn more?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "It won't always be easy," Ms. Chen warned, looking at Linda and Robert. "He'll need to practice differently, and progress might not follow the usual timeline. But music isn't about timelines. It's about connection." Over the next 2 years, Ms. Chen's predictions proved accurate. Thomas struggled with certain concepts that came easily to other students. Reading sheet music presented particular challenges, and his finger strength developed unevenly. But Ms. Chen adapted her teaching methods with creative patience. When standard notation confused Thomas, she developed a color-coded system that made more sense to him. When his fingers tired more quickly than expected, she designed 5-minute exercises he could practice throughout the day. Most importantly, she never treated his differences as deficiencies. "Every pianist brings something unique to the instrument," she told Linda during one of their check-ins. "Thomas has an emotional sensitivity to music that can't be taught. He feels the notes in a way some of my advanced students still haven't mastered." By his 7th birthday, Thomas could play simple classical pieces that showcased his growing talent. His favorites were gentle, melodic compositions, Beethoven's Für Elise and simplified versions of Chopin's nocturnes. His playing had a distinctive quality to it, an emotional transparency that often moved listeners without them understanding exactly why. Life outside the piano room, however, presented greater challenges as Thomas prepared to enter the local elementary school. Linda and Robert had fought hard for an inclusive classroom placement, believing that with the right supports, Thomas could benefit from being with children his age. He deserves the same opportunities as everyone else, Linda insisted during numerous meetings with school administrators. Different doesn't mean less. The school reluctantly agreed to a trial period, assigning a part-time aide to help Thomas navigate the classroom environment. His first few weeks seemed promising. Thomas was quiet but attentive, and his classmates showed the natural curiosity and acceptance often found in young children. One afternoon, the music teacher visited their classroom for a special activity. She brought several small instruments for the children to try: tambourines, recorders, small drums, and a portable keyboard. "Would anyone like to try playing a simple song on the keyboard?" she asked, demonstrating a basic 5-note pattern. Several hands shot up, but Thomas's whole body seemed to rise in excitement. The teacher, not knowing about his piano lessons, called on another student first. The boy tapped out a clumsy version of the pattern, receiving enthusiastic applause from the class. When it was Thomas's turn, he approached the keyboard with confidence unusual for his typically shy demeanor. Instead of playing the simple pattern shown, his fingers moved across the keys in the opening melody of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, which he'd been practicing with Miss Chen. The classroom fell silent. The music teacher's mouth opened slightly in surprise. For 30 seconds, the only sound was Thomas's playing, not perfect, but unmistakably musical and far beyond what anyone expected. When he finished, the silence lingered for a moment before the teacher found her voice. That was wonderful, Thomas. Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Thomas could answer, one of the boys in the back called out, "He just pressed random buttons. That's not real music." A few children giggled and Thomas's shoulders hunched as he returned to his seat, eyes downcast. The music teacher quickly redirected the class, but the damage was done. That evening, Thomas didn't want to practice on their home piano for the first time since he'd started lessons. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Linda asked, sitting beside him on the piano bench. "Jimmy says I'm not a real piano player," Thomas replied, his voice small. "He says people like me can't make real music." Linda felt a familiar ache in her chest, the pain of watching her child encounter the world's casual cruelty. She considered various responses: anger at the other child, platitudes about ignoring mean comments, logical arguments about famous musicians who had overcome disabilities. Instead, she simply placed Thomas's hands on the keys. "Play the song that makes you happiest," she suggested. Hesitantly, Thomas began playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece far beyond what most children his age could attempt. Ms. Chen had been teaching him a simplified version, but he'd been secretly listening to the full recording and trying to capture its dreamlike quality. As he played, his confidence returned. His body relaxed and his expression transformed into one of complete absorption. The notes floated through their living room, each one placed with care and feeling. When he finished, Linda kissed the top of his head. "That's real music, Thomas. And you're a real musician. Nobody can take that away from you." The next day, Linda called Ms. Chen to share what had happened. Together, they came up with a plan, a small recital at Ms. Chen's home studio, where Thomas could play for a supportive audience of family friends and Ms. Chen's other students. "Let's give him a positive experience to balance out the negative one," Ms. Chen suggested, "and maybe when he's ready, something bigger." Neither of them could have predicted just how significant that something bigger would eventually become, or how many people would be silenced by the boy many had underestimated. For now, Thomas continued practicing, his small fingers growing stronger with each passing day, his connection to the music deepening in ways that defied explanation. In the space between the notes, he found a voice that needed no words, a language that spoke directly from his heart to anyone willing to truly listen. The small recital at Ms. Chen's home studio marked a turning point for Thomas. Standing before a small crowd of 20 people, mostly parents of other students and family friends, he played 3 pieces he had practiced for weeks. Despite a few minor mistakes, the warmth of the applause afterward made his chest swell with pride. For the first time, he experienced what it felt like to be seen for his abilities rather than his limitations. "You were wonderful," his father Robert told him afterward, his voice thick with emotions. Chen presented Thomas with a certificate and a small trophy that read "Outstanding Musical Expression." It wasn't fancy, just a plastic gold figurine of a person playing piano, but Thomas placed it on his bedside table, where he could see it every morning when he woke. The years passed, and Thomas's skills at the piano continued to develop. By the time he was 12, he had mastered pieces that Ms. Chen usually reserved for her high school students. His playing had a distinctive quality to it, a raw emotional honesty that, more technically perfect, players often lacked. Ms. Chen described it as playing from the heart rather than just the hands. Middle school, however, brought new challenges that no amount of musical talent could shield him from. Meadowbrook Middle School was 3 times larger than the elementary school. With students coming together from different neighborhoods, the protective bubble of familiarity that had surrounded Thomas in his early school years burst the moment he walked through those doors. Here his differences were more glaring, his mannerisms more noticeable among the chaos of adolescence where fitting in was the unspoken goal. On his first day, Thomas wore his favorite blue button-up shirt and carried his lunch in a brown paper bag his mother had decorated with a small music note. He tried to follow all the rules, moving carefully through the crowded hallways and sitting quietly at the assigned desk in each class. By lunch period, his shoulders ached from the tension of trying to do everything right. The cafeteria was a noisy maze of unspoken social rules. Thomas stood at the entrance, lunch bag clutched tightly in his hands, scanning the room for a friendly face or empty spot. "Hey, new kid." "Over here." Thomas turned toward the voice, relief washing over him at being noticed. A boy with spiky hair and a bright green shirt was waving him over. Thomas made his way through the maze of tables, careful not to bump into anyone. "You can sit with us," the boy said, sliding over to make room. 2 other boys at the table looked up briefly before returning to their conversation about a video game. "Thank you," Thomas said, sitting down carefully. "I'm Thomas." "I'm Alex," the boy replied. "So you're in Mr. Peterson's homeroom, right?" "I saw you this morning." Thomas nodded, opening his lunch bag. "Yes, he seems nice. He's okay." "Hey, what's with the weird way you talk?" Alex asked, his tone suddenly shifting. "And what's that music note for? Are you some kind of music geek?" Thomas felt his cheeks grow warm. He knew his speech was sometimes different. Words occasionally came out slower or less clearly than he intended. "I have Down syndrome," he said simply, having learned from his parents that honesty was usually the best approach. "And I like playing piano." "Piano?" Alex's eyebrows shot up. He exchanged glances with his friends who were now paying attention to the conversation. "Like classical music and stuff? Boring." "It's not boring," Thomas said, a rare spark of defiance in his voice. Music was the one thing he never felt uncertain about. "Show us then," said one of the other boys, whose name Thomas would later learn was Dylan. "Play something on this." He drummed his fingers on the table, mimicking piano keys in an exaggerated, clumsy way that made the others snicker. "I can't play without a real piano," Thomas said quietly. "He can't play at all," Alex stage whispered to his friends. "He's just making it up." The boys lost interest in Thomas after that, turning back to their conversation and effectively shutting him out. He ate his sandwich in silence, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. That night, when his mother asked about his first day, Thomas said it was fine and changed the subject. He didn't tell her about Alex or the cafeteria. Instead, he spent an extra hour practicing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, losing himself in the music until the memory of lunchtime faded into the background. The next few weeks established a pattern. Thomas attended his classes where teachers were mostly patient with him, especially after reviewing his file. He was assigned a peer helper named Grace who showed him where classrooms were located and reminded him about schedule changes. Grace was kind but busy with her own friends and activities, so her help was efficient rather than friendly. In the hallways between classes, Thomas became nearly invisible, a skill he developed to avoid unwanted attention. He kept his head down, walked close to the walls, and tried to blend in with the crowd. The strategy worked most of the time, but not always. "Look, it's the piano genius," Alex called out one day as Thomas was heading to his science class. "Hey, piano man, play us a tune." Thomas quickened his pace, but Alex and his friends easily kept up. "I asked you to play something," Alex persisted, stepping in front of Thomas to block his path. The hallway was crowded, but no one intervened. Some students glanced over curiously. Others deliberately looked away. I need to get to class, Thomas said, his voice barely audible. Just one song, Alex insisted, his tone mockingly sweet. Or maybe you can't really play. Maybe your mommy just tells you you're good because she feels sorry for you. A hot, unfamiliar feeling surged through Thomas, a mixture of anger and shame that made his throat tight. Without thinking, he pushed past Alex and hurried down the hall, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Freak, Alex called after him, followed by laughter that seemed to echo off the metal lockers. Thomas made it to the bathroom just in time. He locked himself in a stall until his breathing steadied and the bell rang for class. He would be late, but being late was better than letting everyone see him cry. That afternoon, Thomas told his mother he wasn't feeling well and wanted to skip his piano lesson with Ms. Chen. It was the first time he had ever asked to miss a lesson. Are you sure? Linda asked, placing a hand on his forehead to check for fever. You love your lessons with Ms. Chen. Just today, Thomas insisted. Please. Something in his voice must have alerted her that this wasn't about physical illness. Linda sat on the edge of his bed, her expression gentle but concerned. Did something happen at school today? She asked. Thomas stared at the pattern on his bedspread, blue and green squares that he had counted many times when he needed to calm down. 1, 2, 3, 4, Thomas, his mother said softly. You can tell me anything, you know that, right? The gentle persistence in her voice broke through his defenses. Words tumbled out. About Alex and his friends, about the cafeteria, about feeling different and being mocked for loving piano. Once he started talking, he couldn't seem to stop. All the hurts of the past week spilling over at once. Linda listened without interrupting, though Thomas could see her jaw tighten at certain parts of his story. When he finally finished, she pulled him into a hug so tight it almost hurt. I'm so proud of you, she said fiercely. So proud of how brave you've been. But you don't have to handle this alone. That's what your dad and I are here for. I don't want you to talk to the school, Thomas said quickly. The thought of his mother complaining to the principal made his stomach twist with dread. It will only make things worse. Linda sighed, recognizing the truth in his words. Middle school had its own brutal social rules and parental intervention often backfired. Let's talk to Ms. Chen, she suggested instead. Not about the bullying, but about finding ways for you to feel confident again. Music has always been your strength. Maybe it can help now too. Thomas agreed, and they drove to Ms. Chen's studio for his regular lesson. The familiar sight of the grand piano in her teaching room, polished black wood gleaming under soft lighting, immediately calmed something inside him. Ms. Chen, perceptive as always, noticed his subdued mood right away. Tough day? She asked simply. Thomas nodded. Let's play something angry then, she suggested, surprising him. Sometimes the piano can say things we can't put into words. She guided him through a thunderous piece by Beethoven, encouraging him to pound the keys during the fortissimo passages. By the end of the lesson, Thomas felt lighter somehow, as if he had transferred some of his hurt into the music. I've been thinking, Miss Chen said as Thomas was packing up his sheet music. The community center is hosting a talent showcase next month. There's a junior division for students your age. Would you consider performing? Thomas's immediate instinct was to refuse. The thought of playing in front of strangers, possibly classmates, sent a wave of panic through him. You don't have to decide right now, Ms. Chen added, noting his expression, but promise me you'll think about it. Sometimes the best way to change how people see you is to show them what you can do. On the drive home, Thomas stared out the window at the familiar streets of Meadowbrook, thinking about Ms. Chen's suggestion. The idea of performing publicly terrified him, but there was also a tiny spark of something else, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this could change things. Mom, he said suddenly, I think I want to do it. The talent showcase. Linda glanced at him, surprise and pride mingling in her expression. Are you sure? It's okay if you're not ready. Thomas thought about Alex's taunting voice, about the loneliness of the cafeteria, about the music that lived inside him that no one at school could see or hear. I'm sure, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I want them to know I wasn't making it up. I want them to hear me. What Thomas didn't yet understand was that this decision, made in a moment of quiet, determination in his mother's car, would change his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The announcement about the community center's talent showcase was posted on bulletin boards all around Meadowbrook. Colorful flyers appeared in shop windows, at the library, and even in the school hallways. Each time Thomas passed one, a mixture of excitement and dread swirled in his stomach. Showcase your talent, the flyers proclaimed in bold letters. Special guest judge, Professor William Bennett from the State Conservatory of Music. The mention of the State Conservatory made Thomas's palms sweat. He had heard Ms. Chen talk about it, a prestigious music school where only the most talented students were accepted. The thought that someone from such an important place would hear him play was both thrilling and terrifying. At home, Thomas spent every free moment practicing. He would rush through homework, help with dinner dishes, and then disappear into the living room where the family piano stood. His parents had learned to give him this space, understanding that something important was building within their son. "What piece are you going to play for the showcase?" Robert asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe as Thomas worked through a difficult passage. Thomas paused, his fingers hovering above the keys. "I'm not sure yet. Ms. Chen gave me 3 options." He played a few bars from each piece he was considering: a lively Mozart sonata, a dreamy Debussy composition, and Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, which had always been his favorite. "The last one," Robert said without hesitation when Thomas finished. "The way you play that one, it's like you're telling a story without words." Thomas nodded, feeling the rightness of his father's choice. The Chopin piece spoke to something deep inside him. When he played it, he felt most like himself. "Ms. Chen says I need to memorize it completely," Thomas explained. "No sheet music on stage." "You can do it," his father said with quiet confidence. "I've seen how hard you work." That night, as Thomas lay in bed, he visualized the piece note by note, his fingers moving slightly under the covers as if playing an invisible piano. The melody followed him into his dreams. At school, Thomas kept his head down as usual, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He still avoided Alex and his friends, still ate lunch alone most days, but he walked with his shoulders a little straighter. The knowledge that he was preparing for something important, something most of his classmates couldn't do, gave him a private source of strength. His science teacher, Mr. Goldberg, noticed the change. One day after class, he asked Thomas to stay behind for a moment. "I saw your name on the sign-up sheet for the talent showcase," Mr. Goldberg said. "I didn't know you played piano." "Since I was little," Thomas replied. "That's wonderful," Mr. Goldberg said, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "My daughter plays violin. Maybe you two could play together sometime." It was a small moment, just a brief conversation, but it meant something to Thomas. A teacher had seen him as more than just the quiet boy with Down syndrome who needed extra time on tests. The feeling stayed with him all day, a warm glow that even Alex's occasional taunts couldn't dim. 2 weeks before the showcase, disaster struck. Thomas woke up with a fever, his throat raw and painful. The doctor diagnosed strep throat and prescribed antibiotics and rest. No school, no activities, and definitely no piano practice for at least a week. But the showcase, Thomas protested, his voice a raspy whisper. "Health comes first," his mother insisted, tucking the thermometer away. "You'll have time to practice once you're better." Those 7 days were some of the longest of Thomas's life. He slept fitfully, took his medicine, and watched the calendar with growing anxiety. When he was awake enough, he would mentally practice his piece, hearing the music in his head, but it wasn't the same as feeling the keys under his fingers. By the time he was well enough to return to piano practice, the showcase was only 9 days away. Thomas sat at the piano, his fingers stiff from disuse, and played the opening measures of the Chopin. The notes came out wooden and lifeless. "It's terrible," he said, dropping his hands to his lap in frustration. "I've forgotten everything." "Your fingers just need to remember," Linda encouraged. "Try again." Thomas practiced until his mother insisted he stop for dinner. The next day he went back to school but rushed home afterward to continue practicing. Ms. Chen added an extra lesson that week, working with him to rebuild the fluidity and emotion in his playing. "The music is still inside you," she assured him. "Trust yourself to find it again." Slowly, the piece came back to life under his fingers. Not exactly the same as before. There was a new urgency to his playing now, an intensity born from the fear of loss, but in some ways, it was even better. 3 days before the showcase, Thomas was staying late at school to make up a science test he had missed during his illness. As he walked toward the front entrance afterward, he heard piano music coming from the music room. Curious, he peeked through the small window in the door. Inside, a girl was playing piano. Someone from the high school, judging by her age. She was working on a complicated piece, her hands flying over the keys with impressive speed. Thomas watched, mesmerized, until she hit a difficult section and stumbled, stopping with a frustrated sigh. Without thinking, Thomas pushed the door open. "That was really good," he said shyly. The girl turned, startled. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was listening." "Sorry," Thomas said quickly. "I just heard you playing and—" He trailed off, suddenly aware that he was speaking to a stranger. "No, it's fine," she said with a smile. "I'm Lily. I'm practicing for the community showcase this weekend." "Me too," Thomas admitted. I'm also in the showcase. I play piano too." Lily's eyebrows rose slightly. Whether from surprise that he played piano or that he was in the showcase, Thomas couldn't tell. "What are you playing?" she asked. "Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major." "That's ambitious," she said, sounding impressed. "I'm doing Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, but I keep messing up the fast parts." She gestured to the piano. "Want to show me some of your piece?" Thomas hesitated only a moment before nodding. He sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. He chose the middle section of the piece where the melody grows more complex and emotional. As he played, he forgot about Lily watching, forgot about the upcoming showcase, forgot about everything except the music flowing from his fingers. When he finished and looked up, Lily was staring at him with wide eyes. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "You play like you're telling a secret." Thomas felt his cheeks grow warm. "Thanks," he mumbled. "We should probably be in different divisions at the showcase," Lily said with a laugh. "I'm not sure I want to compete against you." It was the first time anyone his age had treated his playing as something valuable, something worth respecting. Thomas carried the feeling with him all the way home. The night before the showcase, Thomas could barely sleep. He kept imagining himself on stage, forgetting the notes, freezing under the bright lights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces in the audience, his parents, Ms. Chen, Mr. Goldberg, Lily, Alex and his friends, the judge from the conservatory, all waiting for him to make a mistake. Around midnight, he crept downstairs to the piano, careful not to wake his parents. He didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the darkness and placed his hands on the cool keys. Without playing a note, he simply felt the piano beneath his fingers, solid and familiar. "We can do this," he whispered to himself and the piano. Together. The day of the showcase dawned bright and clear. Thomas woke early, his stomach too knotted with nerves to feel hungry, though his mother insisted he eat something. He dressed carefully in the new outfit they had bought for the occasion, dark pants, a blue button-up shirt, and a simple tie that his father helped him knot. "You look very handsome," Linda said, her eyes suspiciously bright as she smoothed his collar. "No matter what happens today, we are so proud of you." The community center was transformed for the event. The large multi-purpose room now featured a proper stage with professional lighting. Rows of chairs were set up for the audience, already beginning to fill as they arrived. At the center of the stage stood a grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. "That's a real concert piano," Ms. Chen whispered to Thomas as they checked in at the registration table. "The conservatory loaned it for today. Wait until you feel the action on those keys, it's like butter." Thomas nodded, too nervous to speak. His hands felt cold and stiff. What if he couldn't play properly on this unfamiliar instrument? "Performers this way." A woman with a clipboard directed them toward a waiting area behind the stage. "Parents can find seats in the audience." Thomas looked at his mother in panic. "It's okay," she reassured him. "We'll be right in the front row. You can look for us when you go on stage." The waiting area was filled with other performers, singers warming up their voices, dancers stretching, musicians tuning instruments. Thomas found a quiet corner and went through his pre-performance routine that Ms. Chen had taught him. Gentle finger stretches, deep breathing, and mentally playing through the opening of his piece. He was so focused that he didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a familiar voice broke through his concentration. "Well, look who it is." "Piano boy." Thomas looked up to see Alex standing there, dressed in clothes much nicer than what he usually wore to school. Behind him stood Dylan, looking uncomfortable. "What are you doing here?" Thomas asked, his voice coming out steadier than he expected. "I'm in the showcase too, dummy," Alex replied. "I do magic tricks. Pretty cool ones, not boring stuff like classical piano." Thomas didn't know what to say to that. He hadn't known Alex was interested in magic. You're really going to play in front of everyone? Alex continued, his tone disbelieving. You know people are going to laugh, right? Like, are you sure you want to embarrass yourself that bad? Before Thomas could respond, a girl's voice cut in. Hey Thomas, there you are. It was Lily, looking elegant in a simple black dress. She nodded coolly at Alex and Dylan. Friends of yours? She asked Thomas. From school, Thomas said vaguely. Well, they should probably get ready, Lily said pointedly. I heard the magic act is right after intermission. Alex looked between Lily and Thomas with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to figure out how they knew each other. Finally, he shrugged and walked away, Dylan trailing behind him. Thanks, Thomas said quietly. No problem, Lily replied. Nervous? Thomas nodded. Me too, she admitted. But once you start playing, it gets better. The music takes over. The showcase began with a welcome from the community center director and an introduction of the special guest judge. Professor Bennett from the State Conservatory was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. He spoke briefly about the importance of arts in the community and his excitement to hear all the performers. One by one, the acts took the stage. First the younger children's division, then a short intermission, then the magic acts and other performances. Thomas waited backstage listening to the applause, each round seeming louder and more enthusiastic than the last. Finally, it was time for the advanced music performances. Lily went on before him, and even backstage, Thomas could tell from the audience's reaction that she had played beautifully. When she returned backstage, she gave him a quick thumbs up as she passed. And now, the announcer's voice rang out. Our final performer in the junior division. Please welcome Thomas Henderson, playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, into the moment that would change everything. The stage lights were brighter than Thomas had expected. They made the audience hard to see, turning the rows of people into shadowy shapes. For a moment he felt dizzy with nervousness, his feet rooted to the spot. Then, as Ms. Chen had taught him, he looked for familiar faces. Squinting slightly against the glare, he found his parents in the front row. His mother gave him a small, encouraging nod. His father's smile was steady and sure. Thomas walked toward the grand piano at center stage, his footsteps echoing in the sudden hush that had fallen over the room. The walk felt impossibly long, as if the stage was stretching out before him with each step. When he finally reached the piano, he took a moment to adjust the bench, buying himself a few seconds to steady his breathing. From somewhere in the middle of the audience came a harsh whisper, loud enough to carry through the quiet room. This should be good. The retard's gonna play piano. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed the comment. Thomas recognized Alex's voice immediately. His hands began to tremble. Thomas stared at the keyboard, those familiar black and white keys that had always been his refuge now seeming foreign and intimidating. He placed his fingers in position for the opening notes of the Chopin piece, but hesitated, suddenly unsure. The silence in the hall grew heavier. Someone coughed. Another person shifted in their seat, the chair creaking loudly in the quiet room. Anytime you're ready, young man, the announcer said gently from the side of the stage. Thomas closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he remembered something Ms. Chen had told him during one of their lessons. When you play, don't think about the audience. Think about why you love the music. Why did he love this piece? Because it felt like a conversation between his heart and his hands. Because when he played it, he didn't need to struggle for words. Because the music accepted him exactly as he was. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of the Nocturne floated into the hall, soft, questioning like the beginning of a story. Thomas's fingers moved with a sureness that surprised even him, finding each key without hesitation. The familiar melody wrapped around him like a protective cloak, shutting out everything except the music. As he continued playing, something unexpected happened. Instead of growing more nervous under the weight of all those watching eyes, Thomas felt a strange calmness settle over him. The piano beneath his fingers didn't care that he had Down syndrome. It didn't judge his appearance or his speech or the shape of his eyes. It simply responded to his touch, translating the feelings in his heart into sounds that filled the room. The piece built gradually, the melody becoming more complex, more emotional. Thomas leaned into the music, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. His fingers danced across the keys. not with the technical perfection of a professional, but with an honesty and emotion that caught listeners by surprise. In the audience, people who had come expecting to be merely entertained found themselves moved in unexpected ways. An older woman in the third row pulled a tissue from her purse to dab at her eyes. A teenage boy who had been scrolling on his phone put it away and sat up straighter, his attention captured. Near the back, a man who had only come because his niece was performing earlier now sat with his eyes closed, transported by the music. As Thomas approached the most difficult passage of the piece, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. This was the section where he sometimes made mistakes, where the timing had to be just right. For a split second, his fingers faltered. Then he heard it, a soft, encouraging whisper from the front row. "You've got this, Thomas." His mother's voice, barely audible but exactly what he needed. Thomas pushed through the difficult passage, not perfectly, but with feeling and determination. The minor stumble became part of the performance, a moment of vulnerability that made what followed even more powerful. As the piece neared its conclusion, Thomas wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He wasn't worried about making mistakes or what anyone in the audience might be thinking. He was simply telling his story. Through Chopin's notes, a story about a boy who had been underestimated and dismissed, but who had found his voice in music. The final notes of the nocturne lingered in the air, soft and sweet. Like a gentle question left unanswered, Thomas lifted his hands from the keys and placed them in his lap. His head bowed slightly as the last echo faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath. Thomas looked up uncertainly. Had he made a terrible mistake? Why wasn't anyone clapping? In the front row, he could see his mother's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even his father, who rarely showed strong emotion, was wiping his eyes. Then somewhere in the back of the room, someone began to clap. Another person joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. Applause thundering through the community center. There were cheers and whistles and calls of bravo. Thomas sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't polite, obligatory applause. This was real, genuine. The audience wasn't clapping because they felt sorry for him or because they were being kind. They were clapping because his music had touched them. Professor Bennett, the judge from the State Conservatory, was nodding with an expression of surprised approval. Thomas's science teacher, Mr. Goldberg, was clapping enthusiastically, calling out to the people around him, "That's my student." Most surprising of all, Thomas spotted Alex in the middle of the audience. Unlike everyone around him, Alex wasn't standing or clapping. He was sitting very still, a confused expression on his face as if he was seeing Thomas for the very first time. The announcer had to step forward twice before the applause died down enough for him to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Henderson." The applause swelled again at the mention of his name. Thomas stood shakily and gave a small bow as Miss Chen had taught him. As he straightened, he caught a glimpse of Lily standing in the wings, giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up and mouthing, "Amazing." Making his way back to the waiting area, Thomas felt as if he was floating. His body seemed lighter somehow, as if the music and the applause had transformed him physically. Performers and stagehands patted his back as he passed, offering congratulations and praise. That was incredible, the girl who had sung earlier told him. "I got goosebumps." Ms. Chen was waiting for him backstage, her eyes shining with pride. "I always knew you had something special," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "But tonight everyone else knows it too." The remaining performers went on stage, but Thomas hardly noticed them. He sat quietly in the corner of the waiting area, replaying his performance in his mind, still feeling the keys under his fingers, still hearing the sound of that applause. After the final performer, there was a short break while the judges deliberated. Participants were free to join their families in the audience or wait backstage. Thomas decided to find his parents. As he made his way through the crowded lobby, people he didn't know stopped him to offer congratulations. A woman asked if he gave piano lessons. A man who introduced himself as the director of a local community orchestra handed him a business card. "We'd love to have you perform with us sometime," the man said. That was some of the most moving Chopin I've heard in years. By the time Thomas reached his parents, he felt almost dizzy from all the attention. His mother hugged him tightly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. You were wonderful." His father, never a man of many words, simply embraced him, his strong arms saying everything that needed to be said. "Thomas." The voice behind him was familiar but unusually hesitant. Thomas turned to see Alex standing there, looking uncomfortable. Dylan and a couple of other boys from school hung back a few feet watching. "Yeah?" Thomas said, suddenly wary. Was this just another opportunity for mockery? Alex shuffled his feet, not meeting Thomas's eyes. "That was pretty cool what you did up there. I didn't know you could play like that." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but coming from Alex, it was something significant. "Thanks," Thomas replied simply. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Alex nodded and walked away, rejoining his friends. "What was that about?" his father asked, frowning slightly. "Just someone from school," Thomas said. He wasn't ready to explain about the months of teasing and exclusion. Tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about the music. The announcement that the judges had reached their decisions brought everyone back into the auditorium. Thomas sat between his parents, trying to manage his expectations. He had played well, better than ever before, but many of the other performers were excellent too. Winning wasn't what mattered most, he reminded himself. What mattered was that he had found the courage to play. The awards for the younger divisions were announced first, followed by special categories for dance, vocal performance, and other talents. When it came time for the junior instrumental division, Thomas felt his mother squeeze his hand. And the winner of the junior instrumental division, the announcer said, for a performance that displayed not only technical skill, but extraordinary emotional depth. "Thomas Henderson!" The audience erupted into applause again as Thomas made his way back to the stage, hardly believing what he had heard. Professor Bennett handed him a trophy, much bigger and more impressive than the small plastic one from Ms. Chen's studio recital, and shook his hand. "Young man," the professor said quietly, leaning close so only Thomas could hear, "you have a rare gift. I'd like to speak with your parents about special scholarship opportunities at our Saturday music program." Thomas nodded, too overwhelmed to form words. He held up his trophy as cameras flashed, capturing the moment when everything changed, when the boy that everyone had underestimated showed exactly what he was capable of. Later that night, as his parents drove home from the community center, Thomas sat in the back seat with his trophy on his lap, watching the familiar streets of Meadowbrook pass by outside the window. The same streets, the same town, but somehow everything looked different now. "How do you feel?" his mother asked, turning to look at him from the front seat. Thomas thought about it for a moment, searching for the right words to describe the mix of emotions inside him. Pride, relief, excitement, a sense of possibility he had never felt before. "Like they finally heard me," he said simply. "Like they really heard me." His mother smiled, her eyes bright with tears and happiness. "They did," she agreed. "And this is just the beginning." The Monday after the showcase, Thomas woke up earlier than usual. For a moment he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if the events of Saturday night had been just a wonderful dream. Then he spotted the trophy on his dresser, gleaming in the early morning light, and felt a warm glow of happiness spread through his chest. It had been real. Getting ready for school, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was excited. Would things be different now? Would people look at him differently? Another part was nervous. What if nothing changed at all? What if Alex and his friends went right back to mocking him, as if the showcase had never happened? "Ready for school?" his mother asked as Thomas came downstairs for breakfast. He nodded, though ready wasn't exactly how he felt. "Remember," she said, handing him his lunch bag, "no matter what happens today, what you did on Saturday was real. Nobody can take that away from you." The bus ride to school was much like any other day. Thomas sat alone near the front, looking out the window as familiar houses and streets passed by. A few kids from other grades who had been at the showcase smiled at him or gave him a thumbs up. But most of the students on the bus either didn't know about his performance or didn't care. As Thomas walked from the bus to the main entrance of Meadowbrook Middle School, he heard someone call his name. Turning, he saw Lily waving at him from her parents' car. "Hey, piano star," she called, hurrying over to him. Though she attended the high school on the other side of the campus, both schools shared the same drop-off area. "Still feeling good about Saturday?" "Yeah," Thomas said, smiling. "Still feels kind of unreal." "Well, get used to it," Lily said. Professor Bennett doesn't give out compliments easily. He's known for being super picky. If he liked your playing, you must be really good. Thomas felt his cheeks grow warm at the praise. Thanks for helping me, with Alex and stuff. Lily shrugged. No big deal. Guys like that are all the same. They pick on people because they're insecure about themselves. She glanced at her watch. I've got to run to class, but I meant what I said about practicing together sometime. Maybe we could even do a duet for the spring recital. The idea of performing with Lily, a high school student, a serious musician, made Thomas's heart skip a beat. That would be awesome, he said. Cool. I'll talk to Ms. Chen about it. Lily gave him a quick wave and headed toward the high school building. Thomas watched her go, feeling a little lighter than before. Having an older student, especially one as talented as Lily, treat him like a peer meant something. Inside the middle school building, Thomas sensed a subtle shift as he walked to his locker. People who had never paid attention to him before now glanced his way. A few nodded or smiled. His social studies teacher, who had been at the showcase with his family, stopped Thomas in the hallway to congratulate him again. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about your performance, the teacher said. She's been begging me to sign her up for piano lessons. As Thomas was putting his books in his locker, he felt someone approach. Turning, he found himself face to face with Grace, his peer helper from the beginning of the year. I didn't know you played piano, she said without preamble. My mom took me to the showcase. You were amazing. Thanks, Thomas said, surprised that she was talking to him outside of their scheduled helper times. Some of us are having lunch in the courtyard today, Grace continued. You should join us. Before Thomas could respond, the bell rang for first period. Think about it, Grace said with a smile before hurrying off to class. Thomas stood for a moment, processing what had just happened. Had he actually been invited to sit with Grace and her friends at lunch? The same Grace who had always been polite but distant, who had helped him because it was her assigned role but had never shown interest in actually being his friend. The morning passed in a blur of classes. In each one, Thomas noticed small changes in how people treated him. In math, a boy named Carter asked to borrow a pencil. A minor interaction, but Carter had never spoken to him before. In English, when the teacher assigned group work, two girls immediately asked Thomas to join their group, rather than leaving him to work alone as usually happened. Most surprising of all was science class, where Mr. Goldberg greeted Thomas with a broad smile and then said to the entire class, "We have a celebrity with us today. For those who weren't at the community showcase on Saturday, our own Thomas Henderson won first place in the junior instrumental division with a piano performance that brought the house down." A few students clapped, while others looked at Thomas with new curiosity. From the back of the room, Thomas could feel Alex watching him, but for once there were no snide comments or mocking laughs. When lunchtime came, Thomas hesitated outside the cafeteria. Part of him wanted to take up Grace's invitation to sit in the courtyard with her and her friends. Another part was afraid it was some kind of trick, or that he would say something wrong and embarrass himself. Taking a deep breath, he decided to be brave. He had faced his fears on Saturday night when he walked onto that stage. He could face them now. The courtyard was a small garden area where 8th graders were sometimes allowed to eat when the weather was nice. Grace was sitting at a picnic table with 4 other students. She waved when she spotted Thomas. "Hey, you came," she said, making room for him at the table. "Guys, this is Thomas. Thomas, this is Nick, Zoe, Luis, and Bethany." "We know who he is," Zoe said with a smile. "The piano guy." Thomas sat down, feeling awkward but pleased. The conversation flowed around him. Talk about teachers and homework, a new movie that was coming out, plans for the weekend. The others made efforts to include him, asking his opinion or explaining inside jokes. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when he felt out of step, when he couldn't find the right words quick enough, when his speech patterns made someone look at him strangely. But it was so much better than eating alone. "So how long have you been playing piano?" Luis asked during a lull in the conversation. "Since I was little," Thomas replied. "Maybe 5 or 6. "That's dedication," Nick said, sounding impressed. "I tried learning guitar last year but quit after like 3 weeks." "Piano is different," Thomas said, warming to a subject he loved. "It's like the music is already there in the keys. You just have to find it." The others nodded, and Thomas was surprised to see genuine interest in their faces. For the first time at school, He wasn't being defined solely by his disability. He was being seen as a person with thoughts and talents and something valuable to contribute. The weeks following the showcase brought other changes too. Professor Bennett from the State Conservatory called Thomas's parents to discuss a special scholarship program for gifted young musicians. After an audition at the conservatory, which was nerve-wracking but successful, Thomas was accepted into their Saturday program, where he would receive advanced instruction alongside other talented students from around the state. Ms. Chen was thrilled. "This is a remarkable opportunity," she told Thomas during one of their regular lessons. "The conservatory program will challenge you in new ways. And," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "I hear Lily has also been accepted." At school, the initial excitement about Thomas's performance gradually faded, as he knew it would. Not everyone became his friend overnight. There were still difficult days, still moments when his differences made him a target. Alex and his friends mostly ignored Thomas now rather than actively taunting him, which was an improvement but not a complete transformation. What had changed, though, was Thomas himself. He walked taller, spoke more confidently, and no longer tried to make himself invisible in the hallways. The knowledge that he had something special, something uniquely his, gave him a core of strength he hadn't possessed before. One afternoon, about a month after the showcase, Thomas was practicing in the school music room during his free period. The music teacher had given him permission to use the piano whenever the room wasn't being used for classes. He was working on a challenging piece for the conservatory program when he sensed someone watching him. Looking up, he saw Alex standing in the doorway. "Sorry," Alex said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just walking by and heard the music." Thomas nodded, his hands resting lightly on the keys. He waited, unsure what Alex wanted. "That sounded cool," Alex said after an awkward pause. "What is it?" "Bach. It's for my lessons at the conservatory." "Oh, that's where you go on Saturdays now, right?" Thomas was surprised Alex knew about that. "Yeah." Another silence fell between them. Alex shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Look," he said finally, "I've been meaning to say, I'm sorry for being such a jerk to you, before the showcase and stuff." The apology was so unexpected that Thomas didn't know how to respond. "It's okay," he said eventually, though part of him thought it wasn't really okay, that the months of teasing and exclusion weren't something that could be erased with a simple apology. "No, it's not," Alex said, seeming to read Thomas's thoughts. "I was awful to you because—" He trailed off, then tried again. "I guess because it was easy, and I thought it made me look cool. But then I saw you play at the showcase and you were so good and everyone was cheering for you and I just felt like I was the one who didn't belong." The honesty in Alex's voice surprised Thomas. "Everyone's good at something," he said. "Your magic tricks were pretty cool too." A ghost of a smile crossed Alex's face. "It's well, not as cool as your piano playing." He hesitated, then added, "Anyway, I just wanted to say sorry and maybe I'll see you around." As Alex turned to leave, Thomas called after him. "I'm practicing here most Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you ever want to, I don't know, hang out or something." Alex looked back surprised. "Yeah, maybe. That might be cool." Thomas wasn't sure if Alex would take him up on the offer. Maybe they would never be friends in the traditional sense, but something had shifted between them. Some barrier had been broken down, and that was a start. 6 months after the showcase, Thomas performed at the conservatory's spring recital. This time there was no nervousness, no cruel comments from the audience, no doubt in his mind about whether he belonged on that stage. He played a duet with Lily, a complex piece they had practiced for weeks, and received another standing ovation. His parents were in the front row again, just as they had been at the community showcase. His mother cried again, too. But the audience was larger now, filled with people who had heard about the remarkable young pianist with Down syndrome, who played with such emotional depth. Among the new faces were several of Thomas's classmates from school, including Grace and her friends, who had organized a group to come support him. Even Mr. Goldberg was there, beaming with pride as his former student took a bow. As Thomas looked out at all those people who had come specifically to hear him play, people who saw him for his abilities rather than his limitations, he thought about how much had changed in less than a year. There would still be challenges ahead. The world wasn't always kind to people who were different. There would be other Alex types, other closed doors, other moments when he would have to prove himself all over again. But Thomas knew something now that he hadn't known before that night at the community showcase. He had a voice. It might not always come through in his speech, but it sang clear and true through his music. And people were listening. After the recital, as Thomas was gathering his sheet music, Professor Bennett approached him with an older man Thomas didn't recognize. "Thomas," the professor said, "I'd like you to meet Mr. Harrington. He organizes a summer music program in New York for exceptional young talents. We've been discussing the possibility of you attending this year. New York, a summer music program, exceptional young talents." These words washed over Thomas like a wave filled with possibility and promise. "What do you think?" Professor Bennett asked. "It would be challenging, but I believe you're ready for it." Thomas thought about all the people who had underestimated him throughout his life. The doctors who had listed all the things he might never do. The teachers who had been surprised by his academic progress. The classmates who had judged him by his appearance or his manner of speaking. He thought about how it had felt to prove them wrong, to show the world what he was truly capable of. "I'm ready," he said, and in that moment he knew it was true.